When we look at international trade and we look at a lot of offshoring in recent years, we've seen the iPhone and probably other phones as well. But Apple is an American company. It's probably our best company as far as profitability, as far as branding, as far as net worth and everything else. And of course, phones are made overseas. Now, all of this happened back in the early aughts, in the late 90s, because that's where the supply chain moved to in Southeast Asia, as far as anything with high tech, semiconductors, everything. And so people were saying, and political administrations are always saying, let's tax that iPhone, let's bring them all back to the United States and all the manufacturing. And that sounds like a good idea. And maybe in the long run it would be, but I don't think it could happen because we don't seem to have the manufacturing supply chain in place here. But let's look where the money really goes. And this was a study done several years ago back on the iPhone 7, and it will go all the way up to the current iPhone. But the United States still gets the share. If the iPhone 7 was $237.45, U.S. took about $70 of that. Japan took very close to the same. Again, some of the raw materials and manufacturing processes that make it so efficient, Japan came in second. But we still came in first. Taiwan and other smaller countries, it goes down. Korea, now of course Samsung, that's Samsung right there, because Samsung makes so many of the Apple iPhone processors. And then China got about $8.46. So even though it was thought that the phones are completely assembled in China, that they would make the most out of that, the design and of course everything else that goes into that iPhone, just on the cost-wise, goes back to the United States. And then when we sell it, we mark that $237 up to $900, or of course to the $1,200 for the most current iPhone if you want extra memory and a bigger iPhone. You can see that the lion's share still goes to our country, and of course those extra costs are certainly the marketing costs, which will always be your highest cost, and the sales cost, which is part of marketing, and commissions and etc. So it sounds like a great idea. This is kind of a micro shell of how complex as foreign trade. It's not just an easy, hey, make them all here. Sometimes here in the United States, sometimes that just can't be done. And again, it's a very complicated equation, but we still take the lion's share of that. Now, again, Samsung, Korea takes the lion's share because that is Korea's most famous and well-known and trusted organization. Years ago, I came up with this Wealth of Nations. I've updated it as much as I can over the past 10 years, and it still states these four right in here. As far as who's the strongest country or the strongest union, the United States comes in at a $22 trillion GDP. I know these numbers have gone back and forth because of what COVID has done, and it will remain interesting in the next few years. China comes in, when you equate their economy into US dollars, it's 13 trillion, India 3 trillion. The European Union has been holding steady for 10 years, right at 18 trillion. They have a low growth rate. Now, right now, the United States growth rate in GDP is huge because we are coming back from the brink of disaster. It's 7%. We basically always need a 3.5% growth rate of GDP. So these are some numbers to always keep in mind throughout your career, throughout your lifetime, that how fast, what's the U.S. economy growing at. When it's around 3 to 3.5%, we're in an expansion stage. China grows somewhere around 7 to 8%, maybe a little bit higher right now, but they got to have 10% for their economy to be in a recovery expansion stage. India is a very fast growing, and so is the European Union. It's really not that fast growing. It's a very older area. Of course, it's some of the oldest areas, civilization in the world. Well, so is China, but it's also older population. And so their growth rate is about 2.8%, and it really hasn't hovered. It's probably gone down in the past few years. But China and India certainly have a fast growth rate because they have hovered these rates for 10 years. We have gone down as low as 1%. So the fastest growing two countries in the world are India and China. And certainly now you look at our population versus the others, that gives us close to a $50,000 household GDP or standard of living. The average household in America would have $50,000 worth of income coming in, which gives us the highest standard of living for a country our size, or certainly over 300 million, the best in the world. Now, I keep trying to flesh this out. Before the COVID mess, we look at the world's economy share, how we were growing slower and China was growing faster. Again, the share of the economy in 2016, the total world economy, the USA had just about 25% of it. Of all the economy in the world, USA was 25% of that. China was about 15%. India was about 3%. In 2050, at the current growth rates of 2016, China would eclipse us. China would be the biggest economy in the world with 20%. India would be 15%, USA 12%. Again, those are simple calculations. Anything can change, and COVID certainly changed that. Whether this will pan out, well, we'll have to see in our lifetime, won't we? But at some point, it was very well thought that China would take over as the world's largest economy. We have been the world's largest economy basically since World War I. Now, exchange rates and foreign currency valuations. We've had a trade deficit since the 1980s. And so, good, bad, or equal, or indifferent, I should say, our government would like to see a trade surplus. We would like to be able to sell more than we import. It looks better, it seems better. And so, can you manipulate your currency to gain a better foothold in the trade wars? In a mathematical theory, we're going to check that out. I think you can. So if your country manipulates the exchange rate, again, a dollar will give you so many Chinese yuan, so many Japanese yen, so many Canadian dollars, so many euro dollars, etc., and their currency will do the same. So, what is the influence when that happens? And maybe you've heard of a currency war. What happens when that occurs? Well, it has been a idea of the U.S. Treasury to devalue the dollar against other currencies, and maybe that would help our trade balance. Maybe we'd go to a trade surplus versus a deficit. It's kind of complicated, but let me do something very simple to see what that is. In January of 2010, so we go back in time, you could get 150 yen for $1. Okay, so $1 equals 150 yen. So let's say you have a Japanese import. It's coming over here into America, and that import cost 600 yen. All right. So from the Japanese manufacturing standpoint, 600 yen to that's the final cost of that product, and now it's coming over here, and so we're converting the yen. So you divide 600 by 150, and it's $4 for that same product. Okay, so now it's come over to America, and we've just made the calculations $4. Again, this is a perfect example, my friend. There's nothing there's no noise out here. Now, the American export, we're going to export something very similar to that. All right, so let's say it's 3 golf balls, okay, and that export is in American dollars. We would sell it. Let's just say that the cost or the sales price is $5. Now it goes to Japan. Is 750 yen, and they're 3 good golf balls. Well, automatically in Japan, it's going to cost a Japanese golf officio, all right, someone who likes to play golf, 600 yen for the Japanese product, which they know of. And here comes the American product. It's going to cost an extra $150 yen, or an extra dollar there. Probably the Japanese golfer said, I would rather have my own golf balls for 600 yen. Well, Treasury Department said, how can we make our American golf balls just a little bit more appealing to the Japanese golfer? All right, let's change the value of the dollar. So let's see if we can make the dollar weaker. In January 2014, $1 equaled 77 yen. Wow, that's almost half. So you used to get 150 yen in 2010. In 2014, you only got 77 yen. The yen got much stronger and the dollar got weaker. Now let's say everything else was the same. Let's say those 3 golf balls, that one sleeve of golf balls was 600 yen still, because it's just easy to do that way. It still comes over to America $7.80. Excuse me. It comes over to America at $7.80 now, not $4. Why? Because it takes more dollars to buy that product. So the Japanese golf balls are $7.80. So the thinking is, hey, you will buy the American golf balls, all right, because they're still $5. Now, when our 3 export golf balls, same price, let's say, go to Japan, it's now 385 yen, not 600 yen. Wow. So our exports will do better in Japan, and the Japanese imports won't do as well because it's more expensive. Now, as I looked at that, if we want to say, can that lead to inflation in some, or at least a price increase? That's a 95 price increase in 4 years, 24% a year. So the devaluation of the dollar theory, imports will decrease because we're not going to buy the import, we're going to buy our domestic product, and exports are going to increase because now our product is cheaper in, let's say, Japan. In a fair world, there's the caveat right there. But here's the thing, I really like those Japanese golf balls. I really like a Honda, a Toyota, an Infiniti, a Nissan versus the ones I can buy here. So I'm going to go ahead and pay the extra price. Wow, there's a lot of things when you get outside the mathematical equation in the real world, it gets different. Today, by the way, August 2021, $1 equals 110 yen. And it's been going from 100 to 110 yen. So the dollar's a little bit stronger than it was, but not as strong as it was back in the day. Well, the reason we still love some of those Japanese products is because years ago, decades ago, actually after World War II, when Japan was rebuilding itself, and Charles Deming, the Deming way, went to help them as a industrial engineer. And basically, Japan said, hey, anytime you're in manufacturing, you have standard deviations. This is a manufacturing process. And so out of a lot of 100 cars, if you go one standard deviation, you'll have 68%. So everything should fall right in here, which means 68% of the cars are really good, or 68 cars are really good. And now you got about 32 that could cause you problems. If you go to 2 standard deviations right in here, and this is your quality tolerance is what it really means. Now all of a sudden you have a 95% accuracy. So 95 cars using good quality tolerances are good and 5 are bad. 5 are lemons. If you go to 3 standard deviations, these are also called sigmas. From 3 sigmas, you should have about 98%, maybe 99%, which means 99 cars are good, 1 car is bad. Japan did not take that as something they would go for. They don't want 1 bad out of 100. They want 0 defects. So theoretically, Japanese engineers said this line has to come down. They went to 4, 5, 6 sigmas. Hence, if you've ever heard 6 sigma training, it's trying to get 100%. Now, in theory, this line right here never touches the horizon. There's always a chance of a mistake. But Japanese manufacturing takes it to 6 sigmas. American manufacturing, now, is there an increased cost? If you go to 6 sigmas in your quality tolerances, it says, I don't even want to have 1 out of 100, you know that quality's got to be super good. And unfortunately, in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, Ford, GM, AMC, which was Chevrolet, Chrysler, they put their sigmas at about 1. You know what? 68's not that bad. 68 good ones, 32 bad ones. We're going to make so much money. And by the way, we want those cars to go bad at some point because you got to buy a new car. And it's a lot cheaper. So our quality was not as good simply for profitability when Japan's quality was so great. That's why we still wanted to buy the Hondas and the Toyotas and the Nissans or the Datsuns of the day because the quality of a small little car, a little old, I think that's an old, that could be an old Honda, not an old Corolla. And I had one in 1994, and that unfortunately it got in a bad wreck because someone hit me. That car would still be driving today. It just ran like a top. It would not stop running. So that kind of also, we didn't take into consideration that the quality of other countries' products were simply better than ours, and we and the American consumer would pay more. There is again the all-seeing eye of the Illuminati, the New World Order. The devaluation theory of a dollar is this: imports will increase, and so imports are going to decrease, exports increase in a fair world. Now, John F. Kennedy, President of the United States, said there's many ways and many words and many areas you could describe life, but fair is not one of them. We do not live in a fair world. It has not worked for 40 years. By the way, other countries put a lot of trade tariffs. So those golf balls going back to Japan, even though they were cheaper, Japan could have said, hey, we're going to put a $2 tax on it. So the domestic product is still going to be winning. And of course, the quality of products. We still do it today. We still try to devalue that dollar, my friends. Now, we look at some of our different trading partners. We have Canada, oil, $1 equals $1.55 Canadian. That was back in the early aughts. This is why things were really good in the early aughts and then the 90s. A barrel of oil costs 100 Canadian dollars. You bring it over the border, you pay $65 for it. A few years later, we're at a one-for-one split. We're basically at a one-for-one split today. It's $1 per Canadian dollar. So just in a few years, all of a sudden we had a 35% increase because it's $100 for that same barrel of oil. Again, but we needed the oil. That's the problem. We had to have it. It wasn't like we could just buy our own. We had that's the number one import is oil, and that we do. That's why our trade deficits do look so strange, because we import a lot of oil. Now, fracking has done a lot to have our own oil supplies, no doubt, no doubt. But in the day, we have a lot of oil coming from Canada. We just had to have it, and so we were paying more. And we means you. All right, the American consumer is going to pay that, take up that cost. Now, we look at China. We wonder if China will ever trade fairly with us. Well, in 2014, $1 buys you 6 Japanese won. And so Chinese imports 100 won. It's $16 for those imports. In 2020, it actually went higher, which means you got more won for the dollar. The Chinese imports were $14. So American manufacturers simply cannot beat some of these prices that we buy straight from China, because we do not put an import tariff or tax on that. So we saved 12%, which has kind of helped us, at least the American consumer, over the past 30 years. Chinese imports, the reason they are cheap, because they do manipulate their currency. They try to keep the yuan at a much weaker value to the dollar, let the dollar be stronger. So they can import their products at a very low price. And honestly, it helps the average consumer because we're paying less prices. That's just the way it works. International business activity, my friends. The easiest way to get in this, if you're an eBay, or if you're an Amazon, or if you're a Poshmark, is importing and exporting. Simple things come in, you build it in your country, you ship it out to other countries, and you import it from other countries, back and forth. If we want to get a little more interesting, your business idea, the companies you work for, we could do international licensing, all right, agreement to use some of the firm's intellectual property, no shipping costs or trade barriers. You get a percentage of sales and profits. If we go back to our wonderful spring break t-shirt idea that we talked about earlier, and you have this great design, and all of a sudden you have people in Asia and Europe say, well, we want that same shirt. Do you want to go over there and do you want to make a whole bunch more and send them overseas and incur all those costs? Or if you find an organization that will honor your patented, or I should say trademarked, t-shirt, they will create it there, they'll ship them out, they'll do all the work, and you get a percentage of sales. By the way, any deal you ever do in life, do you want a percentage of sales or profits? Okay, go ahead and just say it out loud. I hope you said sales, because a company can always make a loss. All right, they can count all sorts of expenses. You don't care about their profitability, you care about sales. Sales is a very top number. It's a gross number, which means there's nothing taken out of it, and that's what you want. Other international like that, we do international franchising. All right, so when Subways and Starbucks go all the way across, although Starbucks are mainly corporate owned, but Subway franchises or Burger King or McDonald's, they're basically taking, it's the same right to duplicate that product or service. The biggest in the last is foreign direct investment. Joint ventures are when two companies come together and make a new product, but joint ventures are the highest level. That means you are completely in one country, actually manufacturing, doing all the business in that country. And that's why we've seen Toyota, Honda, Nissan, BMW in America. So they can basically evade any type of import tariffs because it's now domestic made car. Most of your Toyotas and Hondas and Nissans are made in the United States. But they're made under the same quality specifications that you would see in Japan or other countries. And Apple, Microsoft, IBM in China and India, et cetera, et cetera. Goes back and forth. That's the highest level of international business activity. When did everything get so crazy and so globalized? Because it didn't used to be this way. For years and years and years, pretty much each country was making their own products, exporting them, but we were buying mainly American from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Yeah, we were still, we certainly were importing a lot, but the base was still American. Well, globalization basically views it as the world, instead of several markets, all national markets. We'll market just to Mexico, just to Europe, just to China, just to India, just to Vietnam, just to Canada, as one giant market. That's where things certainly have gone. And if you're ever bored and you want to read a book about how everything got so crazy, because this is really a brief history, my friends. It's really the last 40 years that everything has gotten this way, at about a 7,000 year of civilization. So The World is Flat by Thomas Friedman. Interesting book. He looks at it when he was on a business trip to Bangalore, India, and he came across a lot of American companies over here. And this was in the late 90s, and as Columbus sailed the world to say that the world is round, Thomas Friedman said, well, actually, he may have been right in the first place, Columbus, or the thought of the day, the world is flat. And mean flat, it is a very small world, and many more countries have leverage. And so it goes into globalization, back into the 1800s. Who were the big players? Oh, man, we're talking kings and queens, civilization up to 1800. And it was basically your country. Did it have muscle? Did it have horsepower? Did it have wind power? Did steam power? Because there wasn't electricity. Major players and super wealthy and royalty were it. And all of a sudden it started changing very quickly. Globalization 2.0, maybe 1800, 1989 seems to be the real year things just were. The wheels were really set in motion. And as we look at that, what happened in 89? Well, the Berlin Wall fell, all right? East and West Germany. Basically was the fall of communism is what it meant. And not only was it that, all of a sudden smaller companies could get in. The access was breaking. The European Union was really formalizing, so where you could look at the European Union as the United States. And all of a sudden people creating contact, people like us could start doing things. Now, Ronald Reagan had the great speech in Berlin, and I believe that was more like 1987 when he said, Mr. Gorbachev, who was the premier of the Soviet Union, tear down this wall. And it was it was New Year's Eve, 1989, when the wall came down. It basically was a representative of everyone gets a voice now some way. And as we look at how the world flattened itself in this period of 1990s, 2000, the aughts and the teens, and we look at that big movement was the collapse of the Berlin Wall and communism. Netscape, I don't know if anybody even knows that. That was the first internet, one of the first internet browsers, one of the first big ones. I think AOL bought it. if they're even in business anymore. Working, outsourcing, now social networking has certainly made this a very flat world, much more layers. But that open sourcing became social networking, offshoring, outsourcing, and of course supply chains and the steroids, the computer in your hand always. That was Steve Jobs. That was his vision. You know, back in the day, Bill Gates was trying to put on internet TV. He bought the company, so an internet on every TV. And Steve Jobs was, I have a better and bigger vision, and that's the internet in everybody's pocket, always, all the time, always on, always cultured, always wired. So that gives you a little idea how fast. And again, the book's a good read. You should find it free somewhere, or half-price books, or even go on and just read the synopsis of it. But what we're looking at really changed in the last 20 to 30 years. It's a pretty recent phenomenon of how we have become where we are today. And of course, as this gets more flat and this converges every year, again, how fast the flow of information goes. As I said earlier, the terrible COVID process has probably put us into the future 10 years. You know, in 2030, we would have been doing much more work from home, much more internet, much more deliveries, much more everything, literally from your pocket, all your shopping, your commerce, and your work. And so perhaps this has pushed us a lot faster, this global catastrophe. We'll see, my friends. We'll see. Even though we're in an unflat world, there are a lot of areas that are very poor. Right? There's still areas in Haiti. There's areas in India. There's areas in Brazil. There's areas in the United States that simply do not. The kind of the technology has surpassed them, and can they catch up? I do have this video for you on our resources page, and this was the video called Rwanda aims for one laptop per child. And if you do any history of Rwanda in the 90s, it was a horrifying genocide that wiped out so much of the country. Where to me, it's I cannot explain it, I cannot understand it, but it was terrifying. And several years later, the general who ended the genocide became president, and he aimed for one laptop per child, and that's from the Harvard MIT experience. That was every young person got a laptop in Rwanda, every young Rwandan, because most of the time they were working in the fields. There was nowhere else for them to go, and this keeps them in school. This was right around 2005, so watch the video I have. It's very well done. And now we can see the results some 12 years later. Right about that time, because Paul Kagame, and I've just completely obliterated the guy's name, very sorry, he wanted to leapfrog among other African nations his size, because he said we've got to change, and we've got to change fast, and we need to be a place where Rwandans want to live, and we need to be the shining example in Africa. So in 2005, their GDP was $2.5 billion. So they're basically about 10 years after the horrifying genocide. Okay. Just so you know, that country's at 2.5. Dallas Fort Worth during those same times is close to 500 billion. Just Dallas Fort Worth area. To just give it a little bit of perspective there. In 2010, they went to 6 billion. Now that is huge. 2018 GDP 10. And they have an 8% growth rate. When you look at other countries their size, Sierra Leone, Burundi, Liberia, they're almost very close to the same. Within some, but they're kind of stacked right in here. 10 years later, now this is when one laptop per child kind of goes into effect right in here in 2005, 6, 7. So, we're talking those were probably 10-year-olds. And so now they're somewhere around 20 to 25, and somewhere in that age group. In 2010, you see the big difference here. 6 billion. And 2018, which is basically 12 years later, at $10 billion economy at a growth rate of 8%. That was very strategic thinking by Paul Kagame. And look what Rwanda has done. when technology is put into the right hands, usually children, and how amazing that turned out for them. So, flat worlds can get grow very fast. Little interesting on the global economy. If we just look back in the old countries, in the old years of 1800, all right, this is when we start seeing change, because in the 1800s it was called the Great Awakening. Also, we see telecommunications coming in the telegraph in 1844. But we have Beijing, London, you have Istanbul, Turkey, you have Naples, Italy, you've got some Japanese, Osaka and Kyoto. 100 years later, wow, London is now the biggest. It switched. But look at New York, wasn't even on there 100 years ago. We have New York, Paris, Germany, Chicago, we have Philadelphia. 100 years later, 2000, these were the top 10 cities of the world. So New York's still there, Los Angeles, and now 2020. Tokyo, Japan's still there's not a lot of room in Japan, so Tokyo takes up most of it. But you've got India. We don't even have a United States city anymore. New York's no longer even in the top 10. Again, this is according to most geography websites here. What will be 2030? Again, it'll be very interesting to see how fast things grow. Does Dubai, all right, Arab Emirates, does Dubai make it in there? United Arab Emirates, I don't know why I say American. United Arab Emirates, it will be in there probably. Interesting how things are growing, because now it's who's probably population rates, and of course our population in the United States is really going down almost at a steady rate of almost to zero. Interesting, my friends. The population growth of the world. The first time we ever hit 1 billion people living on the world at one time was 1804. Then we got to 3 billion in 1960, 5 billion 1989, 7 billion 2011. We should hit 8 billion next year. So I should have gone back to back. So basically over 100 years to double the population from 1804 to 1927. Then we got 1 more billion to 1960, then 4 billion 1975. Then we got to 5, then we got to 6, then we got to 7. We should hit 8. We were supposed to hit it this year. And then 10 billion. Now I say maximum capacity. Pretty much demographers, those who study growth, scientists say 10 billion is pretty much the maximum this earth can occupy at one time. Just to have food, to have shelter, to have this clothing, your basic Maslow's needs right in there, and to be somewhat of health. And we're almost there. At a 1% growth rate, we would be at 20 billion people by the year 2100. Hope that, I don't think I'll be around then, and that's going to be really crazy if we can make it that long. The new global economy, my friends, has been for the past 10 to 15, 20 years. If your work can be digitized, this was a Thomas Friedman saying, it can be globalized, which means if all we do is just it can be digitized, then that can be farmed out anywhere in the world. We've got to add tremendous value, okay? And of course, if it can be digitized, it can be artificial intelligence. So your creativity, your soft skills, your communication skills, your innovation, your knowledge, your emotional intelligence, how to deal with people, how to deal with lots of different people in a very positive way. Adding value, recognizing we know our competition now can be anywhere in the world. We have to do some different things, and also to thrive and survive in this world. I think if we can create a secondary income, you will be in a great position to do just that. The next video we have will be ethics and social responsibility.